The stench of unwashed bodies and cheap synthetic alcohol hit Captain Jace Fleming's nostrils as he stepped through the rusted doorway of Outpost Zenith's underground market. The dimly lit cavern stretched before him, a hive of illicit activity where anything, and anyone, could be bought for the right price. "Remind me why we're here again, Cap?" Torrin Vex asked, his cybernetic eye whirring as it adjusted to the low light. The burly Martian first mate towered beside Jace, muscled arms crossed over his chest. "Parts for the atmospheric regulator," Jace replied, keeping his voice low. "Unless you fancy suffocating in your sleep when we hit the Carina Nebula next week." Torrin grunted. "Could have sent Naira. She's better at haggling with these scum." "Our engineer is busy keeping the Nomad from falling apart," Jace said, scanning the market stalls. "Besides, I needed to stretch my legs." The truth was more complicated. After 3 months in deep space, Jace needed something to break the monotony, even if that something was an illegal trading post tethered to an asteroid in the lawless fringes of settled space. They weaved through the crowd, passing vendors selling everything from prohibited tech to exotic creatures in glowing cages. Jace was negotiating for regulator parts with a 4-armed Duraxian when a commotion erupted from the center of the cavern. gather round," bellowed a pot-bellied man in an outdated suit. "Special auction today, gentle beings of discerning taste." "Let's go," Torrin muttered. "Slave auctions aren't our business." Jace nodded in agreement, but something caught his eye as the crowd parted, a flash of iridescent blue skin. His curiosity piqued, he moved closer despite Torrin's protests. On the makeshift stage stood a young woman, her skin a luminous azure that shimmered with subtle patterns when she moved. Her eyes were solid silver, lacking pupils, yet somehow conveying profound sadness. Delicate crest-like ridges crowned her head where hair would be on a human, and her wrists were bound with energy cuffs. "A rare prize indeed," the auctioneer proclaimed. "A pure-blooded Celestian, sold by her own father to cover substantial debts. Imagine the status you'll gain with such an exotic beauty serving in your household." Jace felt his stomach turn. The Celestians were a reclusive, advanced species known for their telepathic abilities and complex social hierarchy. They rarely ventured beyond their home system, and slavery had been outlawed in Confederated space for over a century. Starting bid, 20,000 credits. The crowd murmured. It was an astronomical sum for most of the rabble gathered here. "Her father sold her." Jace whispered to a hooded figure beside him. The stranger nodded. "High Counselor Dravik of the Celestian Inner Court. Gambling debts to some nasty characters. Word is he chose exile for his daughter rather than lose his position." Jace studied the woman more carefully. Despite her bound hands and the hopelessness etched on her face, she maintained a regal posture. 30,000, shouted a reptilian trader. 40, countered a human in corporate military gear. Something twisted in Jace's gut. He'd seen plenty of ugly things in his decade captaining the Nomad, border skirmishes, pirate raids, corporate exploitation, but there was something particularly vile about a father selling his own daughter. 50,000, called the reptilian. The auctioneer beamed. 50,000. Going once. 100,000 credits, Jace said clearly, his voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to him. Torrin grabbed his arm. "Cap, have you lost your mind? That's almost everything we made on the Proxima run." Jace ignored him, meeting the Celestian woman's silver eyes. For a moment, he felt a whisper of something brush against his consciousness, surprise, confusion, a flicker of hope. 100,000 credits, the auctioneer crowed. "Do I hear 110? The crowd fell silent. Even for a Celestian, that was more than most were willing to pay. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the flight jacket. As Jace transferred the credits, nearly emptying the Nomad's accounts, Torrin paced behind him, muttering Martian curses. "The crew will mutiny," he growled. "What are you planning to do with her anyway?" "Set her free," Jace said simply. Torin stopped pacing. You spent our profits to free a stranger. Wouldn't be the first time I've made a questionable decision, Jace replied with a half-smile. Remember when I took on a discharged Martian Force Recon soldier with anger management issues as my first mate? Torin snorted but said nothing more as they approached the stage. The auctioneer handed Jace a control key for the energy cuffs. She's all yours, Captain. Quite a purchase. The Celestian will make an excellent addition to your collection. She's not a collectible, Jace said coldly, taking the key. He approached the Celestian woman, who regarded him warily. Up close, her skin's iridescence was even more striking, patterns of light moving beneath the surface like luminescent currents. My name is Jace Fleming, captain of the independent freighter Nomad, he said, keeping his voice gentle. What's your name? She hesitated, then spoke in accented standard. Lyria Narisval, daughter of High Counselor Dravik Narisval of the Celestian Inner Court. Jace deactivated her cuffs. Well, Lyria, you're free to go wherever you want. I can arrange transport to the nearest Confederation outpost if you'd like. Confusion crossed her features. You purchased me to release me? Humans have a complicated history with slavery, Jace said. Let's just say I couldn't walk away. Lyria rubbed her wrists, studying him with those unnerving silver eyes. I have nowhere to go. My father's actions have made me an exile. No Celestian will take me in. Then come with us, Jace offered, surprising himself. At least until you figure out your next move. The Nomad's not much, but we've got a spare cabin and steady work. Torin sighed dramatically. And now we're taking on passengers. Wonderful. Lyria's expression remained unreadable. Why would you help me? Because it's the right thing to do, Jace said, then grinned. And because seeing the look on my crew's faces when I tell them I spent our profits freeing a Celestian princess will be priceless. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Lyria's lips. I'm not actually a princess. The Celestian hierarchy is more complicated than that. Even better, Jace said. You can explain it to us on the way back to the ship. As they navigated the crowded market, Jace noticed how beings scrambled to get out of Lyria's way, some making superstitious gestures. Celestians were rare enough to be the stuff of rumors and half-truths in the outer systems. They fear me, Lyria observed quietly. People fear what they don't understand, Jace replied. And the rumors about Celestian telepathy don't help. Lyria's luminous patterns shifted. The rumors are not entirely inaccurate. Jace raised an eyebrow. Are you reading my thoughts right now? No, she said quickly. That would be incredibly rude without permission. But I can sense emotions, intentions. Yours are surprisingly uncomplicated. I'll take that as a compliment, Jace said with a laugh. They reached the docking bay where the Nomad waited, a Kestrel-class medium freighter, battered from years of hard service but meticulously maintained. Its hull displayed the scars of a dozen close encounters, patched and repatched over the years. Not much to look at, Jace admitted, but she's home. As they approached the loading ramp, Torin jogged ahead, presumably to warn the crew. Jace could already imagine the conversation happening on board. Lyria stopped at the base of the ramp, looking up at the ship then back at Jace. You truly intend to help me, a stranger, at great personal cost. It wasn't a question, but Jace answered anyway. I've been on the wrong side of desperate before. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to help. She studied him intensely, those silver eyes seeming to peer into his soul. You are, unlike any being I have encountered, Captain Fleming. Call me Jace, he said, gesturing toward the ship. Come on. Let's introduce you to the rest of the misfits I call a crew. As they walked up the ramp, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that his impulsive decision had set something significant in motion, something that would reach far beyond the fate of one exiled Celestian and a freighter captain with more heart than sense. He had no idea how right he was. You did what? Naira Cade's eyes widened in disbelief, her wrench dangling forgotten from her oil-stained fingers. The ship's engineer, a tall, dark-skinned woman with intricate circuit pattern implants tracing her temples, stared at Lyria as though she were a malfunctioning engine component. I used our profits to free her from a slave auction, Jace explained for the third time, maintaining his casual posture against the galley wall despite the tension filling the room. Around the worn metal table sat the rest of the Nomad's core crew, Torin, still grumbling, Dr. Wendell Pike, the ship's elderly medical officer, examining Lyria with undisguised fascination through thick spectacles, and Ziv, their Arcturian navigator, whose translucent skin pulsed with green bioluminescence, a sign of curiosity in their species. It was an impulsive but admirable decision, Dr. Pike said, adjusting his spectacles. The ethical implications won't fuel our ship or feed our crew, Naira interrupted. No offense to our guest. She nodded stiffly toward Lyria, who stood uncomfortably by Jace's side. Lyria's luminous patterns dimmed slightly. Your concerns are valid. I have no wish to be a burden. You're not a burden, Jace said firmly. And we're not broke. We still have enough for supplies and fuel to make the Helios run. The payment for that job will more than replenish our accounts. Assuming we don't all get blown to atoms crossing the cartel territory, Naira muttered. Ziv's translucent fingers tapped a rhythm on the table. The statistical probability of safe passage has decreased by 17% since the cartel established new checkpoints last month, they offered unhelpfully. See? Even the walking calculator thinks it's risky, Naira said. I merely stated facts, Ziv replied. I make no value judgment on the captain's decision to rescue the Celestian female. Lyria's crest ridges rippled slightly, a reaction Jace couldn't interpret. There was so much about her species he didn't know. Look, Jace said, straightening up. What's done is done. Lyria stays until she figures out her next move. And yes, I expect all of you to treat her like any other crew member. He looked around the table. Any further objections? A moment of silence passed before Dr. Pike cleared his throat. I'd like to conduct a medical examination, if Miss Lyria consents. Purely for my records, you understand. I've never had the opportunity to examine a Celestian up close. Lyria inclined her head. I consent, Doctor, though our physiologies differ significantly from humans. Fascinating, Pike murmured, eyes gleaming with scientific interest. Great, Jace said. Naira, how long until the atmospheric regulator is fixed? The engineer sighed in resignation. Give me 6 hours. Assuming the parts you bought aren't complete garbage. They'll work, Torin said defensively. I checked them myself. I'll show Lyria to the spare cabin, Jace said. We depart for the Helios system at 0600. As the crew dispersed, Jace led Lyria through the narrow corridors of the Nomad. The ship hummed with the familiar vibration of its aging reactor, a sound that had lulled Jace to sleep for over a decade. Your crew doesn't trust me, Lyria observed quietly. They don't know you yet, Jace corrected. Trust takes time. They stopped outside a small cabin near the medical bay. Jace pressed his palm to the access panel, and the door slid open with a mechanical groan. It's not much, he said, gesturing to the sparse room, a narrow bunk, a small desk, and a tiny private washroom. But it's yours for as long as you need it. Lyria stepped inside, her fingers trailing over the metal wall. It's more than sufficient. On Celestia, physical spaces are considered unimportant compared to mental ones. Mental spaces? Jace questioned. Our telepathic abilities allow us to create and share mental constructs, spaces that exist only in the mind but feel as real as this room. Her silver eyes met his. It's difficult to explain to non-telepaths. Try me, Jace said, leaning against the doorframe. A hint of surprise flickered across Lyria's features. Most species find our abilities disconcerting. They prefer not to discuss them. I'm not most people, Jace replied with a half-smile. And I like learning new things. Lyria hesitated, then gestured for him to enter the cabin. When the door closed behind them, she sat cross-legged on the floor and motioned for him to do the same. I can't bring you fully into a mental construct without deep telepathic contact, but I can show you an approximation, she explained. May I touch your hand? Jace nodded, settling on the floor across from her. Lyria's cool fingers rested lightly on his wrist. Close your eyes and try to relax your thoughts. Jace did as instructed, feeling slightly foolish until the sensation hit him like a plunge into cool water. Suddenly, he wasn't sitting in a cramped cabin anymore. He stood in what appeared to be a vast garden beneath an amber sky. Crystal formations rose like trees around him, their surfaces reflecting impossible colors. The air felt different, richer somehow, carrying scents he couldn't name. This is a memory of the crystal gardens on Celestia, Lyria's voice echoed around him. Or rather, my interpretation of it, simplified for your mind to comprehend. Jace turned slowly, taking in the alien landscape. This is incredible, he breathed. It feels so real. For my people, it is real, Lyria replied. This is how we communicate, how we preserve history, how we create art, through shared mental experiences. The vision faded gradually, leaving Jace blinking in the dim cabin light. Lyria withdrew her hand, her skin patterns pulsing with slightly brighter intensity. That was. Jace struggled to find words. Overwhelming for most non-telepaths, Lyria finished. I kept the connection superficial. Beautiful, Jace corrected. It was beautiful. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. Thank you for sharing that with me. He stood, offering a hand to help her up. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day as we prepare to depart. Lyria accepted his hand, rising gracefully. Captain, Jace, I want you to know that I understand the sacrifice you made. I will find a way to repay your kindness. No repayment necessary, Jace said. Just, maybe help Torin understand that not all your people are like your father. A shadow crossed Lyria's face. My father's actions are unfortunately not uncommon among the High Council. Our society has grown, calcified in its thinking. Many believe our genetic purity and traditions are more valuable than individual lives. Hard to imagine selling your child for any reason, Jace said. To him, I was an investment that failed to yield returns when I refused an arranged marriage to a powerful family, Lyria explained, her voice carefully controlled. My exile serves his political interests while removing a disappointment. The matter-of-fact way she described her betrayal made Jace's chest tighten with anger. Well, his loss is our gain, he said lightly, trying to lift the sudden heaviness in the air. A small smile touched Lyria's lips. Perhaps so. Get some rest, Jace said, stepping back toward the door. Ship's galley is always open if you get hungry. After leaving Lyria's cabin, Jace made his way to the bridge, where he found Ziv running pre-flight calculations, their translucent fingers dancing over the navigation console. The Celestian's presence alters our projected course outcomes, Ziv stated without looking up. How so? Jace asked, dropping into the captain's chair. Unknown variables increase chaos potential. The Arcturian's skin pulsed with mathematical patterns. Her identity may attract unwanted attention. Jace frowned. You think someone might come looking for her? A High Counselor's daughter, sold illegally outside Federation space. Ziv's large eyes blinked slowly. Probability suggests complications. When don't we have complications? Jace sighed, running a hand through his short brown hair. Precisely why additional complications are statistically undesirable, Ziv replied. Jace was about to respond when the ship's comm system crackled. "Captain, you're going to want to see this," Naira's voice came through. "Meet me in engineering." In the cramped engine room, Naira stood beside an open access panel, her expression grave. "What am I looking at?" Jace asked, peering at the tangle of wires and components. "This," Naira pointed to a small device nestled against the main power coupling, a glossy black oval with pulsing red lights. "It's not one of ours." Jace felt his blood run cold. "A tracker?" "High-end," Naira confirmed. "Military grade, possibly Celestian tech. I only found it because I was rewiring the regulator." "How long has it been there?" Naira shrugged. "Hard to say. It's integrated with our power system, so it could have been installed any time we were docked in the past month." Jace's mind raced. "Can you remove it without triggering an alert?" "Already working on a bypass." Naira tapped her temple implants. "But whoever placed this wasn't messing around, Cap. Someone really wants to know where this ship goes." Jace straightened. "Keep working on it. Don't tell the others yet, especially Lyria. I need to figure out if this is connected to her." "You think she planted it?" Naira asked skeptically. "No," Jace said after a moment's consideration. "But I think her father might have resources we don't fully understand." As he headed back to his quarters, Jace's earlier optimism faded. If High Counselor Dravik was tracking the Nomad, their simple freight run to Helios just got a lot more complicated. What had seemed like a straightforward rescue was quickly evolving into something much more dangerous. He needed to learn exactly what kind of political game Lyria's father was playing, and fast, before it put his ship and crew at risk. In the quiet of his cabin, Jace pulled up everything the ship's database had on Celestian politics. It wasn't much. The isolationist species kept their internal affairs private, but one thing became clear: High Counselor Dravik Narisval was not a man who let go of anything easily, especially not something he considered his property. The question was, what would he do to get his daughter back?